नैनों थारी कैसा जादू किया रे. Good afternoon, and welcome to another session of lessons from my mother. We are on lesson number 20, so I've been doing this for almost half a year now, which I'm very, very proud of, very, very grateful for. Um, Next week, I think I will have my first non-related guest because I've already had my mother on, I've had my younger brother on, and we've talked about uh, two lessons when I was in England. But now we're going to have one of my closest friends here in Montreal. He's from Peru. His name is Joe Chirampi. He's going to come and he's going to talk about his mother and the lessons he's learned. And then maybe a week after, I'll invite another friend of mine who's like a sister to me. Um, who also lives in Montreal, and she's going to come and talk about her sister, and then I'll start building further and further from there. But lesson number 20 is about people watching. And this lesson doesn't only come from my mother, it also comes from my grandfather. So, my mother's father, who was admittedly one of the most important men in my mother's life. If you recall, I think it was the first lesson of honoring your father or loving your father. I think it was the first one where I talked about how my mother used to praise her father's hair and lack of hair and say how magnificent and how attractive it is, and she would lionize her father. She has such wonderful memories from him. Like my father has incredible memories of his mother. Every time he talks about her, he becomes emotional. And if my father, Abu, if you're watching this right now, even the thought of my grandmother, his mother, uh, brings tears to his eyes, and it's very much possible that he's tearing up even now because she was such a special lady. And my mother's father also was a very, very special person. He was, can't remember all the things he did, but I do remember he used to be a lawyer, and before that, he used to be in the police with the British at the time, and he was a very keen observer of human behavior, and he would come and teach lessons to my mother and her sisters and brother, and those lessons have trickled down to us. And he'd come and talk about how the British people speak, how they are punctual, and how they try to be very careful with the words that he use, and so forth. And then he'd also talk about the kind of watch they wore, how they wore their sleeve, how they wore a suit. He would observe all of them. Some people may have worked with the British and not really paid any attention. I might have been one of those people, just focused on my own path to greatness and not learned anything from them. It's also possible. For example, my younger brother lives in England. He's been living in England for 21 years. And he has a very keen sense of observation. So he would walk into a room, and within 5 seconds, he's observed everything in the room. He's seen all of it. And he enters and he goes, "Why is the fridge magnet changed?" And you say, "What? Why did you even see that?" And the eyes are always circling around, gathering all information. My mum is exactly like that. My mother is exactly like that. She walks in and she's always observing things. She's looking at people's faces and saying, "You seem hungry." And the person says, "How did you know?" "Well, because your cheeks were flushed and this and that and so forth." And Joe, who would be on the show tomorrow, is exactly like that. In fact, I've ended up collecting a large group of very close friends who have this personality of being perceptive, um, and indulging in long periods of observation. My mother was in my guest house at Oxford. I think they came for my graduation. Was it? No, not for my graduation. For another day, for something else. My parents were visiting me in Oxford, and from the guest room, you could see out into gardens. And with the gardens at Wolfson, we have a lake because it's the best college in Oxford. So we have a lake, And me and my dad were having a long conversation about various things about politics and this. And my mother was just leaning against the wall of one of the beds and staring out of the window. And 2 hours passed. 2 hours had gone. Um, and my father said, "Are you hungry?" And she said, "Yeah, we can go eat." "Okay, let's go eat." And as she got up, she said, "That girl is having an argument with that boy because that boy did this and did that, and the people next to them are doing this and they are doing this." And there were around 50 summer school students in the garden at that time, and she had seen all of them. And she'd observed all of them, and she had retained memories from all of them, and she had rightly predicted behavior. "Oh, that person's going to leave, just watch." And I watched, and it came true because she had been watching them for 2 hours calmly. Imagine the amount of patience, focus, and, and discipline or motivation you need to watch a group of people for 2 hours. People can't even watch movies for 2 hours. They leave the cinema. They're, "Oh, it's too long, it's too slow." Watching people just sitting and watching. So my friend who's going to come next week does the same. I have a few other very close friends who meet somebody and they do this. "Hi, how are you? Nice to meet you." And the eyes, and after they start to teaching me this, I started learning it. I'm still very far behind, but I'm learning it. And their eyes gloss over the person like a brush, as if they're painting the person with a brush and they're learning everything as they paint. It's so wonderful. And then half an hour later, they'd say, "Yeah, this person suffers from depression." "What?" "Yeah, the way he scratches his nose every time, and these blah 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 deposits under his eyes, and this." And you're like, "When did you notice this? When did this happen?" "Oh, I was just..." And those are keen eyes for observation. And my mum has that too. But the lesson that my grandfather taught her was that when you're at a bus stop, because she would travel by bus, when you're at a bus stop, the first thing you have to do is observe your surroundings. Okay, are there any sharp objects? Are there any rocks? Is there a glass broken? Are there any remnants or materials or whatever? What if it rains? What if it snows? What if it's too windy? What if it's too hot? One. Number two, observe all the people around you. That gentleman is walking with a cane. It means that gentleman might be slightly older or has trouble walking. So if somebody attacks you, perhaps that gentleman can't protect you. But you could use his cane to protect yourself. That young lady is doing this. That old woman is doing that. That woman is pregnant. That man is scratching his nose. That man doesn't seem to have X. That man is standing next to that girl, but she's not speaking to him. Are they related? And gradually you start watching all the people around. You start making mental notes. And if something goes wrong, you are prepared. Because chance favors the prepared mind. So when it comes to people watching, that's what he told her. My grandfather told my mother to do this. Because even today, protection for women in the public space is an unreconciled, not reconciled problem still in the public space, even in 2022. I'm talking about 1972 or 1968. I'm talking about 50, 60 years ago. But even then, the lesson still remains. The lesson still remains even today. If you are walking, I maintain the same lesson even today, because sometimes I'm out till midnight-ish. And if I'm out and I take the bus and I walk home, I'm always watching behind me if somebody's walking. And my building has automatic doors if you log in. And I go into one automatic door and then I wait for it to close and I look around and then I open the second one. Because there's always the danger that you open both of them and somebody who doesn't belong in that building or somebody who could be a thief or a robber or a hooligan could run in because of your mistake. Could happen. Hasn't, thankfully, wouldn't, hopefully, but it could. Potentially it could. because you were careless. Same goes with if you're crossing the street. So I am an absolutist when it comes to traffic rules because I am also an architect. And if architects don't follow the rules that they themselves have created, how can anybody else follow them? How can we expect them to follow any of the rules? So I follow all the rules of traffic, of mobility, of movement because I designed them, or people like me designed them. So I'm always aware that, oh, the light is green, that one's red, that person's here, that person's there, those cars are coming, this is happening. And then I wait for my time to cross. I never jaywalk or whatever it's called. Why bother? Why bother? Because anything could happen at any time. There's a small probability of it happening, but that doesn't mean it is impossible. You could still get hit by a car, right? So I try to be very safe and I try to be very mindful of things that go around. But the advice from my grandfather and then my mother was not just for the public space. I have political ambitions, as everyone knows, and politics is nothing if not an understanding of people. Politics is people, full stop. I would argue this point for centuries. Religion is people and faith, or people and God, and people and divine. Religion is beyond people. Politics is only people and people alone, not even animals, I would say. Or you may argue for animals, but politics is people. And incredibly successful politicians, political leaders, political strategists are great readers of humans, of their body language, of their tone, of the way they speak, of the way they look, and then also of their ideas. Ideas, like if you've seen Hitch, which is a fine movie, regardless of what Will Smith has done to his life and career, I still separate the art from the artist. So I will still watch a Will Smith movie. I may not take personal advice from him anymore. But in Hitch, Will Smith was talking about 60% of your communication is body language, 20% is tone. So 90% of what you're saying isn't coming out of your mouth. Now, those numbers may be simplified for the Hollywood audience, but they're around those numbers. So if it's not 60%, maybe it's 57. Okay, so, but essentially, the argument is most of what you're saying doesn't come out of your mouth. It is everything else. Okay, so you have to be mindful of the whole package, how it's being delivered, not just the idea. The tone is important, not because of how it makes you feel. No, I don't care about that. More because it points you to the structure surrounding the argument, the point of view. So one of the things, like I've been observing, how early have I been observing? The first politician I observed was when I was very young in Pakistan, Farooq Ahmed Khan Laghari. He was our president, and I used to watch him and wanted to be like him because I found him very charismatic. If you see him today, you might not think so, but I found him very charismatic. And then in England, I can't remember who I really admire. Tony Benn was a great speaker, but he never became prime minister. And then when Barack Obama became president, I would watch him in his speeches, and he was so charming and so charismatic. And then I would start watching how he moves. And I say to everyone, one of the best walks I've seen ever is Obama, because it's relaxed, it's confident, it's easy, it's also powerful, it's in control, it's authoritative. The way he walks says so much about him, and the way he speaks, and the American people. And the way he speaks and the way he inflects and the way he pauses, all of that matters. Then you take the same observation to Donald Trump. Donald Trump is a fantastic speaker. He's an incredibly persuasive speaker because he is mindful of his body language, of the way he is, except when he dances. I would caution him not to try and dance, please. But when he speaks, he knows what he's communicating. I am communicating a tank. Sorry, I can't do his impression just right now. But he's communicating the feeling of attack. And I watch him and I learn and I say, okay, so if somebody speaks and moves like that, that is what they're communicating. Okay. And this allows you to be mindful of yourself. So I have started learning a few things recently about myself. One of them is that I communicate very authoritatively. And that's a great thing for the boss of a company, a CEO, a president, a global leader. That's a good thing. But in interpersonal dynamics, whether it's a romantic one or a friend, and also with fellow colleagues, with students, I realized, based on how people would react to me, that perhaps I'm communicating with too much certainty, too much authority, and this is going to stop me from learning and growing because I'm declaring my ideas as gospel. And in my mind, that's not what I'm thinking. I'm not thinking I'm the right person, I've thought this through. I'm just thinking, oh, this is an interesting perspective I have, and I'm just going to put it forward. But the way I'm communicating is exactly this. Very clear, very certain, not a word extra, not a word less, tone up, tone down, all of that. But in my mind, I'm not thinking that I'm the right person, this is the way to do it. I'm just sharing an idea. But the way I communicate tells me, and the way I saw people reacting to it, it wasn't a negative reaction. I'm not blaming my classmates, but I started seeing certain things. Let's say they would refrain from indulging in argument with me in the cohort, but also in negotiations. They would refrain from that. They were like, no, I don't want it to become antagonistic. But in my mind, it's not antagonistic. I'm just saying, yeah, we're having a back and forth. We're just having a conversation. That's it. But it may lead to other people feeling, oh, this man thinks he's this shit. I don't want to speak to him anymore. Could happen. So watching others and their reactions to you and watching yourself and watching others around you is an incredibly important skill. If you want to drive a car, you have to know how each part moves and works and what you do in case of an emergency. The same applies to human beings. You need to know how human beings work. And the problem is we are not even fully aware of how we ourselves work. How would we know how the other 8 billion work? So perhaps try spending some time and looking at people and learning things about them and just observing them. Like my friend Joe has, because I told him I want to improve. And I've told my friend Ksenia and my friend Usman, who have these skills, and my mother, I've told them I want to develop this skill more and more. And they sometimes give me assignments. So Joe gave me an assignment also, and Ksenia and my mother gave me an assignment of just don't rush to judgment. Don't rush to anything. Just watch. Just observe and watch. Just watch people and gradually start storing information in a repository. Start gathering information. This is incredibly important for a child as well. But I'm a grown-up now, but even as a child, if you start watching people and saying, that person was cheating, that person studies more, that person washes his hands a lot, that person does not wash his hands a lot. What does this mean? If he doesn't wash his hands after playing in the ground, does that mean he doesn't wash his face? Okay, let's observe. And you observe. Oh, okay. So most people who don't wash their hands also don't wash their faces. interesting, and you start building that repository, it's a great study of the human experience. So I'm going to stop right here. And next week, I'll have one of my closest friends as the first guest to come and talk about his mother. And I look forward to seeing you all then. Have a wonderful week ahead.